From a tragic suicide that changed TV history to dressing room inheritances and controversial ethnic slurs that sparked nationwide protests, this groundbreaking 1970s sitcom hid dark secrets behind its feel-good facade that would shock even the most devoted fans. Fact 1. Cheech and Chong inspired the show. Before Chico and the Man became a television sensation, the show's creator James Comack had his sights set on two entirely different stars. The groundbreaking sitcom that would eventually launch Freddie Prinze to stardom actually began as an ambitious attempt to bring the wildly popular comedy duo Cheech and Chong to network television. Comack, who had already proven his television prowess with hits like The Courtship of Eddie's Father and would later create Welcome Back, Kotter, became fascinated with Richard Cheech, Marin and Tommy Chong's unique brand of counterculture comedy. The producer was so determined to work with the pair that he spent 3 entire months following them on their comedy tour across the country, studying their performances and developing material specifically tailored to their comedic chemistry. The original concept Comack pitched was quite different from what eventually made it to air. According to Comack himself, he initially envisioned a show pairing a Chicano character with a Nisei, which is a second-generation Japanese-American. This early version would have showcased the cultural clash between two different minority communities in America during the 1970s. However, despite Comack's persistence and the months of development work, Cheech and Chong ultimately decided to pass on the television opportunity. The comedy team was riding high on their success in films and albums, and they preferred to maintain their creative independence rather than commit to the demanding schedule and network restrictions that came with a weekly television series. When the duo declined, Comack refused to abandon the project entirely. Instead, he transformed the concept into something new, shifting the focus to a seventh-generation white Anglo-Saxon Protestant character paired with a young Chicano man. This revision became the foundation for Chico and the Man. Though Comack later acknowledged that the show drew heavily from Cheech and Chong's comedy sketches, particularly their Old Man in the Park and Pedro and Man routines. Fact 2. John Ritter got Freddie's dressing room. In one of Hollywood's most poignant behind-the-scenes coincidences, John Ritter found himself inheriting a tragic piece of television history when he was cast as the lead in Three's Company. When Ritter arrived at the studio to film the pilot episode for what would become one of the most successful sitcoms of the late 1970s, he was assigned to use the exact same dressing room that had belonged to Freddie Prinze during his time starring in Chico and the Man. The timing of this arrangement was particularly striking and emotionally charged. Chico and the Man had been forced into an unexpected hiatus following Prinze's sudden death in January of 1977, leaving the popular show's future uncertain and its star's dressing room empty. As television production schedules moved forward with new projects, the studio space needed to be reassigned, and the pilot for Three's Company was ready to begin filming. What made this situation even more profound was that Ritter learned about Prinze's death while driving to the studio for his first day of work. In a later interview, Ritter recalled hearing the shocking news on his car radio as he made his way to what he didn't yet know was Prinze's former workspace. The radio announcement that Freddie Prinze had shot himself came just as Ritter was preparing to step into what could be his own breakthrough television role. Years later, Ritter reflected on this eerie coincidence and how it shaped his perspective on fame and success in Hollywood. Walking through the door of Prinze's dressing room after hearing about the tragedy, Ritter realized that achieving success as a television actor wasn't necessarily the answer to life's problems or the key to happiness. This sobering moment helped ground Ritter's approach to his career and reminded him that professional accomplishments alone couldn't guarantee personal fulfillment. The dressing room assignment became an unintentional memorial to the complexity of show business success and the hidden struggles that can exist behind public triumph. Fact 3. 2 theme songs were used. When legendary Puerto Rican musician Jose Feliciano was approached to create the theme song for Chico and the Man, his anxiety about the project led to an unexpected musical bonus that would define the show's sound. Feliciano, who was already famous for his distinctive guitar style and his iconic cover of Light My Fire, was so concerned that the producers might reject his initial composition that he decided to hedge his bets by writing not one, but 2 completely different theme songs for the series. This wasn't simply a matter of creating alternate versions of the same melody. Feliciano crafted two entirely separate musical pieces, each with its own unique arrangement, tempo, and emotional feel. The multi-talented musician poured his creativity into both compositions, ensuring that either one could serve as a fitting introduction to the show's themes of friendship, cultural understanding, and personal growth between the unlikely pair of Ed and Chico. When Feliciano presented both songs to creator James Comack and the production team, something remarkable happened that the musician hadn't anticipated. Rather than choosing between the two compositions or asking for revisions, the producers were so impressed with both pieces that they made an unusual decision for television at the time. They decided to purchase and use both songs as part of the show's regular broadcast format. The solution was both practical and innovative. The production team assigned one of Feliciano's compositions to serve as the opening theme that viewers would hear at the beginning of each episode, while the second song became the closing theme that played during the end credits. This arrangement gave Chico and the Man a unique musical identity that set it apart from other sitcoms of the era, which typically used only a single theme song. The decision also provided Feliciano with double the exposure for his work and demonstrated the producer's appreciation for his musical talent and the quality of both compositions. Fact 4. The show sparked nationwide protests. Despite its intention to bridge cultural gaps through comedy, Chico and the Man immediately found itself at the center of a fierce controversy that brought Mexican-American activists to the streets in protest. The show's pilot episode, which aired on September 13, 1974, contained dialogue that many viewers found deeply offensive, particularly a scene where Jack Albertson's character Ed Brown tells Chico to get out of here and take your flies with you, along with other ethnic slurs that were written into the script as examples of the old man's prejudiced attitudes. The backlash was swift and organized. Mexican-American community leaders and civil rights activists viewed these lines not as character development showing Ed's bigotry, but as perpetuating harmful stereotypes about Latino people on national television. The fact that this was happening on what was supposed to be the first major network television series to feature a Mexican-American lead character made the situation even more inflammatory for community advocates who had hoped positive representation. The protests quickly escalated beyond angry phone calls and letters to the network. Organized groups of activists began picketing outside NBC's headquarters in Burbank, California, carrying signs and demanding immediate changes to the show's content and approach to its Latino characters. The demonstrators argued that the series was using racist humor disguised as social commentary, and they threatened to organize broader boycotts if their concerns weren't addressed. Faced with this mounting pressure and negative publicity, the show's producers and NBC executives realized they needed to make significant changes to keep the series on the air. The network quickly implemented several modifications to address the activists' demands. The most notable change involved rewriting Chico's background story to make him half Mexican and half Puerto Rican, which was intended to acknowledge the diversity within Latino communities. The producers also toned down the ethnic slurs and offensive language in future episodes, shifting the show's focus more toward the developing friendship between the two main characters rather than emphasizing cultural stereotypes. Fact 5. Prince's heritage was completely fictional. The charismatic young comedian who brought Chico Rodriguez to life on television was living a carefully constructed ethnic identity that bore little resemblance to his actual family background. Freddie Prinze, born Frederick Karl Prutzel, was not the Mexican-Hungarian mix that his character claimed to be, nor was he the Hungarican that he often described himself as during his stand-up comedy performances and television appearances. The reality of Prince's heritage was quite different from his public persona. His mother, Maria de Gracia, was indeed Puerto Rican and Catholic, but his father, Edward Karl Prutzel, was a German Lutheran immigrant who had arrived in the United States as a young man in 1934. There was no Hungarian ancestry in Prince's family tree at all, despite the elaborate stories he would tell about his supposed Hungarian grandmother and the cultural influences that shaped his upbringing. Prince had deliberately created this fictional background as part of his comedy act, finding that the invented Hungarian identity gave him more flexibility and broader appeal in his stand-up routines. The made-up heritage allowed him to play with different cultural stereotypes and accents while creating a unique comedic persona that set him apart from other performers. He would often joke about being caught between two worlds, referencing his supposed Hungarian and Puerto Rican sides in ways that resonated with audiences who appreciated his outsider perspective. When Chico and the Man was developed, The show's writers incorporated elements of Prince's fictional background into the character of Chico Rodriguez. The series eventually established that Chico was Mexican on his father's side and Puerto Rican on his mother's side, with the writers even adding a nod to Prince's fake Hungarian heritage by having Chico mention that his grandmother spoke a little Hungarian. This creative blending of real and imagined ancestry became part of the show's mythology, even though it was built on Prince's completely fabricated family history. Fact 6. The final episode was filmed hours before suicide. The tragic end of Freddie Prinze's life became even more haunting when considering the eerie circumstances surrounding his final day of work on Chico and the Man. On January 28, 1977, Prinze completed filming what would become his last episode of the series, a third-season installment with the deeply ironic title, Ed Talks to God. Just hours after the cameras stopped rolling and the production wrapped for the day, the 22-year-old comedian would take his own life in his Hollywood apartment. The episode's plot centered around Ed Brown feeling reluctant to attend his own birthday party, leading Chico to devise an elaborate scheme to change his mind. In the storyline, Chico convinces one of Ed's old army buddies to pretend to be the voice of God, using microphones and sound equipment to speak to Ed from above and persuade him that his life still has meaning and value. The character who plays this fake divine voice tells Ed that he should embrace life and the people who care about him, delivering messages about hope and the importance of human connection. What made this final performance particularly chilling was a specific scene that viewers would later remember with disturbing clarity. During one moment in the episode, Prinze's character Chico asks Jack Albertson's Ed to hand him a large knife that had been used earlier to cut birthday cake. In what was meant to be a comedic gesture, Chico then makes a mock stabbing motion toward himself while apologizing for the deception about God's voice, treating the idea of self-harm as a joke within the context of the scene. This darkly prophetic moment would take on a completely different meaning just hours later, when Prinze, struggling with severe depression and personal problems, used a gun to end his life. The final episode he filmed became an unintentional farewell that seemed to address themes of mortality, divine intervention, and the value of life, making his subsequent suicide all the more tragic and unsettling. Fact 7. Catchphrase changed due to controversy. During the first season of Chico and the Man, Freddie Prinze brought one of his most popular stand-up comedy lines to television, but the phrase that had worked perfectly in nightclubs would soon become a source of serious controversy on national television. Prinze's original catchphrase for the character of Chico was, "That's not my job," which he delivered with his signature accent and comedic timing whenever Ed Brown asked him to do something around the garage that seemed outside his regular duties as a mechanic. This particular phrase had been a cornerstone of Prinze's live comedy performances, where audiences found it hilarious and endearing as part of his broader routine about cultural differences and workplace dynamics. However, when the same line was broadcast into millions of American homes week after week during the show's first year, it began to draw criticism from viewers and advocacy groups who saw it as reinforcing negative stereotypes about Hispanic workers and their work ethic. Critics argued that having the show's main Latino character repeatedly say, "That's not my job," was perpetuating harmful ideas about Hispanic employees being lazy, uncooperative, or unwilling to go beyond the bare minimum in their work responsibilities. Community leaders and media watchdog groups pointed out that this type of characterization could damage perceptions of Latino workers in real workplaces across the country, especially at a time when the show was breaking new ground as television's first series centered on a Mexican-American character. Recognizing the validity of these concerns and wanting to maintain the show's positive impact on Latino representation, Prinze and the show's producers made the decision to retire the controversial catchphrase. Starting in the second season, Prinze began using "looking good" as Chico's signature line instead. This new phrase had a completely different energy and message, projecting confidence, positivity, and enthusiasm rather than reluctance or laziness. The change was well received by both critics and audiences, and "looking good" became so closely associated with Prinze that it followed him throughout the rest of his career. Fact 8. Jack Albertson nearly rejected the role. When James Comack approached Jack Albertson to star in Chico and the Man, the veteran actor almost walked away from what would become one of his most memorable television roles. Albertson, who was already an established performer with an Oscar, Tony Award, and Emmy to his name, read the initial pilot script and found himself completely unimpressed with the material that would eventually launch the groundbreaking series. At the time Comac made his pitch, Albertson was riding high on a string of successful projects that had cemented his reputation as one of Hollywood's most reliable character actors. He had recently won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his performance in The Subject Was Roses. In 1968, charmed audiences as Grandpa Joe in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. In 1971, and delivered a memorable performance in the disaster epic The Poseidon Adventure in 1972. Given this impressive track record, Albertson felt he could afford to be selective about his next television commitment. The pilot script that Comac presented simply didn't meet Albertson's standards for quality writing or character development. The veteran actor found the dialogue weak, the situations contrived, and the overall concept underdeveloped compared to the sophisticated material he had been working with in his recent film projects. Albertson was particularly concerned about committing to a weekly television series, which would require a significant time investment and could potentially limit his opportunities for other projects. However, what ultimately convinced Albertson to take on the role of Ed Brown wasn't the script itself, but rather his professional relationship with and respect for James Comac. Albertson had observed Comac's previous work as the creator and producer of The Courtship of Eddie's Father, which had been both critically acclaimed and commercially successful. The actor decided to trust Comac's vision and track record, believing that the producer would be able to improve the material and develop the characters into something more substantial than what appeared on the page in that initial pilot script. Fact 9. A drum served as Chico's bathtub. One of the most striking visual elements in Chico and the Man was a scene that appeared during the show's opening credits, where viewers could see Chico Rodriguez bathing in what was essentially a makeshift bathtub that highlighted just how basic his living arrangements really were. The improvised bathroom setup consisted of a large 55-gallon oil drum that had been repurposed as a bathing vessel, located in the men's room of Ed Brown's rundown garage where Chico had made his home. This unconventional bathing arrangement wasn't just a quirky visual gag, but rather a deliberate storytelling choice that immediately communicated important information about Chico's economic circumstances and living situation to television audiences. The image of a young man washing himself in an industrial drum, rather than a proper bathtub, painted a clear picture of poverty and resourcefulness that didn't require any dialogue or explanation to understand. The drum bathing scene served multiple purposes within the show's narrative framework. It established that Chico was living in extremely modest conditions, far removed from the comfortable middle-class lifestyle that most television characters enjoyed during the 1970s. At the same time, it demonstrated Chico's adaptability and determination to make the best of his situation, showing that he could find creative solutions to basic needs even when proper facilities weren't available. The visual also reinforced the show's setting in a working-class East Los Angeles neighborhood, where characters had to be innovative and practical about meeting their daily needs. By showing Chico's drum bath in the opening credits, the producers immediately set viewer expectations about the kind of environment and economic reality that the series would be exploring each week. This image became one of the most memorable aspects of the show's opening sequence and helped establish the authentic and gritty atmosphere that distinguished Chico and the Man from other sitcoms of its era that typically featured more affluent characters in comfortable suburban settings. Fact 10. George Takei played Ed's fake Japanese son. In one of the most unusual guest appearances in sitcom history, George Takei, who was already famous for playing Sulu on the original Star Trek series, showed up on Chico and the Man, in a role that was both surprising and deeply strange. Takei appeared as a character who claimed to be Ed Brown's long-lost son from a relationship that supposedly took place during Ed's military service in Japan following World War II. The episode's premise required viewers to accept the unlikely scenario that the elderly, gruff garage owner had fathered a child during his time stationed overseas as a young soldier, and that this grown son had now tracked down his American father decades later. The casting of Takei, who was well known to television audiences for his role in the science fiction series, added an extra layer of surreal quality to what was already one of the show's most bizarre storylines. What made this guest appearance particularly memorable was the way it played with both characters' backgrounds and the audience's expectations. Ed Brown, who had been established as a cantankerous man resistant to change and suspicious of outsiders, suddenly had to confront the possibility that he had family ties extending far beyond his small world in East Los Angeles. The episode explored themes of identity, family responsibility, and cultural connection in ways that were both comedic and surprisingly touching. Take's performance brought his characteristic dignity and warmth to the role, even as the script asked him to navigate some fairly outlandish plot developments. The episode became a standout example of how Chico and the Man was willing to take creative risks with guest stars and unusual storylines, even when those choices pushed the boundaries of what audiences might find believable. The appearance also demonstrated the show's commitment to featuring Asian American actors in substantial roles, something that was relatively rare on television during the mid-1970s, making Take's casting both entertaining and culturally significant. Fact 11. The guitar-smashing scene was heartbreaking. In one of the most emotionally devastating moments ever filmed for Chico and the Man, the show's writers and producers decided to address Freddie Prinze's death through a powerful scene that would bring closure to both the characters and the audience who had been wondering about Chico's fate. The episode, titled "Raoul Runs Away," featured a moment that was both shocking and deeply symbolic, where Jack Albertson's character, Ed Brown, discovers the young boy Raoul playing with Chico's acoustic guitar among his belongings that had been stored away in a closet. The scene began innocently enough, with 12-year-old Raoul discovering Chico's personal items and becoming curious about the musical instrument that had once belonged to the garage's former resident. However, when Ed walked in and saw the boy handling Chico's guitar, something inside the usually gruff but controlled character completely snapped. In a moment of raw grief and uncontrolled anger, Ed grabbed the guitar from Raoul's hands and smashed it violently against the side of the old van where Chico used to live. The destruction of the guitar served as a powerful metaphor for Ed's inability to cope with his loss and his desperate attempt to eliminate painful reminders of his departed friend. The instrument had represented Chico's creative spirit, his dreams, and his connection to his cultural heritage, making its destruction all the more heartbreaking for viewers who understood its significance. The scene was made even more poignant by the fact that it took place in the same garage space where Ed and Chico had built their unlikely friendship over the previous 3 seasons. The aftermath of this explosive moment drove the episode's plot, as young Raoul became frightened and confused by Ed's violent outburst, believing that Ed no longer loved him and leading to the boy's decision to run away. This forced Ed to confront his grief and eventually explain to Raoul that Chico had died, providing the closure that both the characters and the audience needed. Fact 12. NBC initially rejected Freddie Prinze. The actor who would become the breakout star of Chico and the Man almost never got the chance to audition for the role that would make him famous, as NBC executives initially dismissed Freddie Prinze as completely wrong for the part of Chico Rodriguez. The network's casting department had their own ideas about what kind of performer they wanted for the show's Latino lead character, and the young Puerto Rican comedian from New York didn't fit their preconceived notions about who should play the role. Creator James Komack first became aware of Prinze's talent after watching the comedian's appearance on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson in December of 1973. Prinze had made such a strong impression during his late-night television debut that Komack immediately recognized his potential as a television performer. The producer was particularly struck by Prinze's natural charisma, his ability to connect with the studio audience, and his unique comedic voice that blended cultural observations with genuine warmth and humor. However, when Komack brought Prinze's name to NBC executives as his choice for Chico, the network quickly shot down the idea. The executives felt that Prinze lacked the right look, experience, or appeal that they wanted for their new sitcom, and they encouraged Komack to continue searching for other candidates who might be more suitable for the demanding role of a series regular. Komack refused to give up on his vision and eventually convinced the network to at least give Prinze a chance to audition alongside other potential candidates. During the testing process, Prinze was placed in competition with 2 other finalists who the network considered more appropriate choices for the role. However, when the 3 actors were evaluated through screen tests and audience research, Prinze's natural talent and undeniable screen presence made him stand out clearly above the competition, finally convincing the initially reluctant NBC executives that Komack had been right about the young comedian's star potential all along. Fact 13. Shelley Winters used her real name. When acclaimed actress Shelley Winters made a guest appearance on Chico and the Man, she brought along a surprising personal touch that most viewers probably never noticed. Winters, who was already famous for her Oscar-winning performances and her memorable role in the Poseidon Adventure alongside Jack Albertson, played a widowed bakery owner who sets her romantic sights on Ed Brown. However, the character's name on the show wasn't just another fictional creation by the writers, but rather a direct reference to the actress's own personal history. The character was named Shirley Shrift, which was actually Shelley Winters' real birth name before she adopted her stage name for her Hollywood career. This unusual choice to use her original name as a character name created an interesting layer of authenticity to her performance, essentially allowing the actress to portray a version of herself within the show's fictional world. The decision may have been a playful inside joke between Winters and the production team, or perhaps a way for the actress to pay tribute to her roots while working on the series. This guest appearance also served as a reunion for Winters and Jack Albertson, who had previously worked together in the 1972 disaster film The Poseidon Adventure, where both actors had delivered powerful performances as passengers struggling to survive a capsized ocean liner. Their previous professional relationship and on-screen chemistry made their scenes together on Chico and the Man particularly entertaining, as they were able to draw on their established rapport to create believable romantic tension between their characters. The episode featuring Winters aired during the first season and was titled Ed Steps Out, where her character's pursuit of the reluctant Ed Brown provided plenty of comedic situations. The casting of such a well-known and respected actress in a guest role also demonstrated the show's growing popularity and its ability to attract major Hollywood talent to appear alongside the series' regulars. Fact 14. CBS stole Prince's catchphrase. In what many considered a tasteless and insensitive marketing decision, CBS television network appropriated Freddie Prinze's famous "looking good" catchphrase for their own promotional purposes several years after the comedian's tragic death. The network used Prinze's signature phrase as the central theme for a major advertising campaign promoting their upcoming fall television season, completely ignoring the fact that the words were closely associated with the deceased performer and his memorable character on the rival NBC series. The CBS marketing campaign featured the "looking good" slogan prominently in television commercials, print advertisements, and promotional materials designed to generate excitement for their new and returning shows. The network treated the phrase as if it were simply a generic piece of advertising copy, apparently unaware or unconcerned about its deep connection to Prinze's legacy and the emotional impact it still had on fans who remembered him fondly from Chico and the Man. The public reaction to CBS's use of Prinze's catchphrase was swift and overwhelmingly negative. Television viewers, entertainment industry professionals, and Prinze's fans expressed their outrage at what they saw as a callous exploitation of a dead comedian's most recognizable trademark. Many people felt that the network had crossed a clear line of decency by taking something so personally associated with Prinze and using it to sell their own programming without any acknowledgement of its origins or respect for his memory. The controversy highlighted the complex issues surrounding intellectual property, celebrity catchphrases, and the ethics of using deceased performers' material for commercial purposes. Critics pointed out that CBS was essentially profiting from Prinze's creativity and popularity without offering any compensation to his estate or even basic recognition of where the phrase had originated. The backlash was significant enough that it became a cautionary tale about the importance of sensitivity when dealing with the legacies of entertainers who had died young, particularly in cases involving suicide and personal tragedy. Fact 15. The show introduced TV's first Chicano star. Chico and the Man broke completely new ground in American television by becoming the first network series to feature a Latino character as its lead star, and the first show ever set specifically in a Mexican-American neighborhood. When the series premiered on September 13, 1974, it represented a historic moment for representation on television, introducing millions of viewers to stories and perspectives that had never been seen on primetime network programming before. Prior to Chico and the Man, Latino characters on American television were extremely rare and typically appeared only as minor supporting roles or brief guest appearances that often relied on stereotypes rather than the authentic character development. The idea of centering an entire series around a Mexican-American protagonist living and working in East Los Angeles was revolutionary for its time, especially considering that the major networks had traditionally been very conservative about featuring minority characters in leading roles. The show's groundbreaking nature extended beyond just casting a Latino actor in the title role. The The series was also notable for its authentic East Los Angeles setting, which provided viewers with a glimpse into a community that had been largely invisible on mainstream television. The garage where Ed and Chico worked served as a window into the daily life of a Mexican-American neighborhood, complete with its own unique culture, challenges, and sense of community identity. Freddie Prinz's portrayal of Chico Rodriguez became a significant cultural milestone, as he presented a Latino character who was intelligent, hardworking, optimistic, and multidimensional, rather than the one-note stereotypes that had previously appeared on television. His success in the role demonstrated that audiences were ready to embrace Latino performers as leading men, and that stories centered on Mexican-American experiences could appeal to mainstream viewers across all ethnic backgrounds. The show's impact on television representation was lasting, as it opened doors for future Latino performers and creators to tell their own stories on network television, establishing a precedent for the inclusion of diverse voices in American entertainment.